South Carolina Republican primary just days away. While former President Donald Trump remains the front runner, Nikki Haley says she's not dropping out of the 2024 race despite pressure from within her own party.
Haley held a State of the Race event with a passionate message to her supporters and her critics. Take a listen.
I feel no need to kiss the ring. I have no fear of Trump's retribution. I'm not looking for anything from him. My own political future is of zero concern.
Former President Donald Trump leads Haley among likely voters in South Carolina's upcoming Republican primary, 65-30 in one of the most recent polls. He continues to take aim at his fellow GOP candidate.
She's not working. She's here. She's down by 30, 35 points. And everybody knows her. You're not supposed to lose your home state. She just can't get herself to get out.
Shape up for Saturday's primary in the former governor's home state. Joining us with insight is Dr. Chase Meyer, political science instructor at the University of South Carolina. We are so happy that you're joining us again.
Right, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, a lot to get into, Dr. Myers. We've heard Nikki Haley say that she is not removing herself from this primary, not removing herself from the presidential race. But when we take a close look at the polls and we look at numbers, she's just not doing well in South Carolina. How can she close the gap, and how important is it to even close the gap here in South Carolina on Saturday?
Well, does she have a chance of closing this gap? Yes. Enough to make it an even race or her ahead to get a victory? That's very unlikely, but she certainly can narrow the margin. There's a couple of things working in her factor here. She's spending a lot in South Carolina, more than Donald Trump is, more money being put in the state, more ads. That can convince a few more voters to turn out. Donald Trump has also slightly underperformed the polls in both Iowa and New Hampshire. So add that to the mix too, and there could be a recipe for Nikki Haley to do a little bit better than she is expected to do based on the polls. Will it be enough to get a victory? I don't know. This is a 30-point margin here. That's hard to overcome. But then looking ahead to the future, would it be enough for her to sustain a campaign afterwards? She said she's staying in, but a lot of candidates that drop out always say they're staying in right before they announce they're leaving.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The question, I guess, here is what sort of coalition would she need to build in order to close that gap? Who would be voting for Nikki Haley in a potential close race here?
There is a path for her to get a close race here, and it all comes down to Democrats. Democrats who did not vote in the South Carolina primary a few weeks ago, which Joe Biden won overwhelmingly. So Joe Biden being the incumbent, there wasn't much of a race. A lot of Democrats didn't vote. They stayed home. Total turnout for the Democratic primary was about 131,000. Traditionally in South Carolina, turnout for the Democratic primary ranges around 300, 400,000. That means there are hundreds of thousands of Democrats who did not vote in the South Carolina Democratic primary who are now eligible to vote in the Republican primary. If Haley can convince a few of those Democrats to be like, hey, you don't like Donald Trump, I don't like Donald Trump, maybe we can work something out here. If she can convince a number of those Democrats to do that, she has a chance of make this close. How likely is that to happen, though? Well, that's a tough question. Traditionally, you don't see much crossover voting. It does happen sometimes. Can it happen to the level that she needs it? Possible.
That's really good insight, because we've had a coverage just earlier this week, or last week rather, of the Super PAC primary pivot explicitly reaching out to those Democratic voters who didn't vote in the primary a few weeks ago for the Democratic primary, encouraging them to vote for Nikki Haley this Saturday. I want to talk about independent voters. What role do they play in all of this?
They have some role to play. They can vote as well, and polls show that independent voters do prefer Nikki Haley to Donald Trump. The problem is independent voters rarely vote in primaries. They are one of the lowest turnout groups. Nikki Haley's probably going to have better luck with committed Democrats who at least traditionally vote in primaries, even if it is the Democratic primary. independents just don't vote at the rates that which their numbers imply. You'll see polls all the time say that independents outnumber Republicans and Democrats combined. And that might be true on your average day, but on election day, they do not show up in the numbers of which they identify as.
Yeah, so if the result here is decisive, if the former president is able to win by somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, 30 points, what is the path ahead for Nikki Haley? At that point, does she have to look at the polls and figure out, because many wonder what would be the end game in a situation like that?
That's a tough question to answer, what her end game is. She's the only one who knows. Because when you have campaigns, when it whittles down to two candidates, as it is now, what is that second place person thinking? Do they have a chance of maybe pulling off an upset? Do they see some states that are coming up that may be more favorable to them? Or are they maybe angling to be the vice presidential nominee, showing, hey, I'm competitive. If you want to unite the party, you're going to need me on your ticket. Yeah. Nikki Haley does not seem interested in the VP nod. And given the speech that she gave against Donald Trump and her campaign messaging, it seems as if she has no interest in working with him. But yet, if she loses her home state by 30 points, where is she going to win? How is she going to get the delegates to win? So what her end game is, only Nikki Haley can tell you that, I'm afraid. Yeah. Perhaps she's setting herself up 4 years from now. Perhaps maybe she wants a career as a news anchor at a major network. There's a lot of options for failed presidential candidates out there. Which one she cares about? Or maybe she does truly think she has a path to get the nomination. We'll see, but it's really hard to see that one happening.
And before we wrap, I want to ask you about former President Donald Trump. He's in some legal battles right now, and he is continuing to stay in those battles. Nikki Haley has mentioned that she thinks that it will, quite frankly, help her in her run for president, as she thinks that people wouldn't want to get involved with Donald Trump because of that. From your expertise, does that hurt or help his campaign at this moment?
Well, scandals always hurt a campaign. The more scandals associated with a candidate, the worse they're going to perform. Voters do not want to vote for someone who's done terrible things, who has a dark cloud of scandal over them. So Donald Trump's legal troubles could hurt him in the future. The problem is that right now he's turned his indictments as to what he says, they're attacking me, they're all after me. And so he's rallied Republicans to his cause. But if he were to be convicted by a jury of his peers, we've not had a convicted felon run for president as a major party nominee before. Nikki Haley's probably looking at this saying, hey, we have to think about winning the election as Republicans. Do we really think that we can win the general election against Joe Biden if our nominee is a convicted felon? Problem, of course, is when would that conviction happen? The judicial system takes a long time. Donald Trump will probably wrap up the nomination before there's any jury decision on any of his cases.
Yeah, you just have to wonder if sentiments would change in a situation like that. But listen, we appreciate it. Ahead of the primary, the analysis is definitely appreciated.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
You bet.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break, but before we go to break, we want to remind you that early voting ends tomorrow, Thursday. Voting locations are open from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Another reminder that the primary is this Saturday. If you plan on voting on Saturday, polls open at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. As long as you are in line by 7, you can still vote. If you voted in the Democratic primary, you cannot vote in this one. However, you can cross party lines. You will need to bring a photo ID to cast